John Zachary DeLorean was an American engineer and executive in the U.S. automobile industry, most notably with General Motors, and founder of the DeLorean Motor Company. DeLorean designed a number of highly popular and iconic vehicles throughout his career, including the Pontiac GTO muscle car, the Pontiac Firebird, Pontiac Grand Prix, Chevrolet Vega, and the DeLorean DMC-12 sports car, which was later featured in the 1985 film Back to the Future. While still the youngest division head in General Motors history, DeLorean broke away to start his own company, DeLorean Motor Company, in 1973. However, production delays meant DMC's first car and DeLorean's independent creative opus the DMC-12 did not reach the consumer market until 1981, where a depressed buying market was compounded by unexpectedly lukewarm reviews from critics and the public. After a year, the DMC-12 had failed to recoup its $175 million in investment costs, unsold cars were accumulating and the company faced dire financial straits. On October 26, 1982, DeLorean was arrested on charges of drug trafficking following a videotaped sting operation in which he was recorded by undercover federal agents obliquely agreeing to bankroll a $1.8 million, 100 kg cocaine shipment in exchange for a $24 million cut of the eventual profits. A confidential informant for the prosecution stated in the indictment that DeLorean had confided he needed the money to keep DMC financially solvent. DeLorean was found not guilty at trial by a federal judge after successfully arguing police entrapment, but by then DMC had already collapsed into Chapter 11 bankruptcy and DeLorean's reputation was irrevocably tarnished. When asked after his acquittal if he planned to resume his career in the auto industry, DeLorean bitterly quipped, "Would you buy a used car from me?" Early life. John Zachary DeLorean was born on January 6, 1925 in Detroit, Michigan, the eldest of four sons of Zachary and Catherine Prabak DeLorean. DeLorean's father was a Romanian immigrant, originally from Angstrom-Ugag, Olpa County, who worked in a mill factory. Zachary emigrated to the United States when he was 20. He spent time in Montana and Gary, Indiana before moving to Michigan. By the time John was born, Zachary had found employment as a union organizer at the Ford Motor Company factory in nearby Highland Park. His poor English skills and lack of education prevented him from higher-paid work. When not required at Ford, he occasionally worked as a carpenter. DeLorean's mother, Catherine, was a Hungarian immigrant from Austria-Hungary. She was employed at the Carballoy Products division of General Electric throughout much of DeLorean's early life. She accepted work whenever found to supplement the family's low income. She generally tolerated her husband's erratic behavior, but during several of the worst times of Zachary's violent tendencies, she would take her sons to live with her sister in Los Angeles, California, where they would stay for a year or so at a time. DeLorean's parents divorced in 1942. John subsequently saw little of his father, who moved into a boarding house, becoming a solitary and estranged alcoholic. Several years after the divorce, John visited his father, finding him so impaired by alcohol that they could barely communicate. Education. DeLorean attended Detroit's public grade schools, and was then accepted into Cass Technical High School, a technical high school for Detroit's honor students, where he signed up for the electrical curriculum. DeLorean found the Cass experience exhilarating and he excelled at his studies. His academic record and musical talents earned him a scholarship at Lawrence Institute of Technology, a small Detroit college that was the alma mater of some of the automobile industry's best engineers. At Lawrence, he excelled in the study of industrial engineering, and was elected to the school's honor society. World War II interrupted his studies. In 1943, DeLorean was drafted for military service and served 3 years in the U.S. Army and received an honorable discharge. He returned to Detroit to find his mother and siblings in economic difficulty because of the strains of Catherine's single income. DeLorean worked as a draftsman for the Public Lighting Commission for a year and a half to improve his family's financial status, then returned to Lawrence to finish his degree. While back in college, he worked part-time at Chrysler and at a local body shop, foreshadowing his later contributions to the automotive industry. DeLorean graduated in 1948 with a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Engineering. Instead of entering the engineering workforce after earning his degree, DeLorean sold life insurance, and later worked for the Factory Equipment Corporation. DeLorean states in his autobiography that he sold life insurance to improve his communication skills. Both endeavors were successful financially, but these areas held little interest for DeLorean. DeLorean's uncle Earl Probach, a foreman at Chrysler's engineering garage, recommended that he apply for work at Chrysler, and DeLorean agreed. Chrysler ran a postgraduate educational facility named the Chrysler Institute of Engineering, which allowed DeLorean to advance his education while gaining real-world experience in automotive engineering. He briefly attended the Detroit College of Law, but did not graduate. In 1952, DeLorean graduated from the Chrysler Institute with a master's degree in automotive engineering and joined Chrysler's engineering team. DeLorean also attended night classes at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business to earn credits for his MBA, which he completed in 1957. Career: Packard Motor Company. DeLorean's time at Chrysler lasted less than a year, ending when he was offered a $14,000 salary at Packard Motor Company under supervision of noted engineer Forrest McFarland. DeLorean quickly gained the attention of his new employer with an improvement to the Ultramatic automatic transmission, giving it an improved torque converter and dual-drive ranges. It was launched as the Twin Ultramatic. Packard was experiencing financial difficulties when DeLorean joined, because of the changing post-WWII automotive market. While Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler had begun producing affordable mainstream products designed to cater to the rising post-war middle class, Packard clung to their pre-World War II era notions of high-end, precisely engineered luxury cars. This exclusive philosophy was to take its toll on profitability. However, it proved to have a positive effect on DeLorean's attention to engineering detail, and after 4 years at Packard he became McFarland's successor as head of research and development. While still a profitable company, Packard suffered alongside other independents as it struggled to compete when Ford and General Motors engaged in a price war. James Nance, president of Packard, decided to merge the company with Studebaker Corporation in 1954. A subsequent proposed merger with American Motors Corporation never passed the discussion phase. DeLorean considered keeping his job and moving to Studebaker headquarters in South Bend, Indiana, when he received a call from Oliver K. Kelly, vice president of engineering at General Motors, a man whom DeLorean greatly admired. Kelly called to offer DeLorean his choice of jobs in 5 divisions of GM. General Motors, Pontiac. In 1956 DeLorean accepted a $16,000 salary offer with a bonus program, choosing to work at GM's Pontiac division as an assistant to chief engineer Pete Estes and general manager Seaman Bunky Knudsen. Knudsen was the son of the former president of GM, William Knudsen, who was called away from his post to head the war mobilization production effort at the request of President Roosevelt. Knudsen was also an MIT engineering graduate, and at 42 he was the youngest man to head a division of GM. DeLorean and Knudsen quickly became close friends, and DeLorean eventually cited Knudsen as a major influence and mentor. DeLorean's years of engineering at Pontiac were highly successful, producing dozens of patented innovations for the company, and in 1961 he was promoted to the position of division chief engineer. He is credited with developments such as wide-track wheels, Tempest Senior compact drivetrain consisting of engine in front and transaxle in the rear, 8-lug steel wheel with aluminum brake drum with iron liner, torque box perimeter frame, recessed and articulated windshield wipers, the lane change turn signal, overhead cam's 6-cylinder engine, Endura bumper, and a variety of other cosmetic and structural design elements. DeLorean's most notable contribution to Pontiac was the Pontiac GTO, a muscle car named after the Ferrari 250 GTO. It evolved because after the internal GM ban on racing, which Pontiac had used racing to propel itself into the number 3 sales slot, was taken away, Pontiac was forced to take its efforts off the track and put it on the street to maintain its number 3 position. The result was the GTO. the GTO debuted as a Tempest Le Mans option package with a larger, more powerful engine in 1964. This marked the beginning of Pontiac's renaissance as GM's performance division instead of its previous position as a slightly bigger Chevrolet with no clear brand identity. From its launch in 1964, sales of the car and its popularity continued to grow dramatically in the following years. DeLorean received almost total credit for the success of the first muscle car, which is probably due in large part to his talent for self-promotion. As with any new vehicle development, scores of individuals are involved with the conceptualizing, engineering, and marketing but John DeLorean became the singular golden boy of Pontiac, and was rewarded with his 1965 promotion to head the entire Pontiac division. At the age of 40, DeLorean had broken the record for youngest division head at GM, and was determined to continue his string of successes. Adapting to the frustrations that he perceived in the executive offices was, however, a difficult transition for him. DeLorean believed there was an undue amount of infighting at GM between divisional heads, and several of Pontiac's advertising campaign themes met with internal resistance, such as the Tiger campaign used to promote the GTO and other Pontiac models in 1965 and 1966. One of the biggest disappointments for Pontiac was the GM's 14th floor's Ed Cole's decision to ban multiple carburation. Multiple carburation had been with Pontiac since 1956, starting with 2X4 BBLS and Pontiac's famous Tri-Power since 1957. Ironically, the only GM cars to escape this ban was Ed Cole's beloved Corvair and Corvette. There are scores of this conflict with Ed Cole that go way back to Bunky Knudsen. The most memorable would be the 1964 GTO was supposed to be equipped with disc brakes which were even tooled for free by Kelsey Hayes, and radial tires were supposed to be offered but were killed by Cole as well. In response to the pony car market dominated by the wildly successful Ford Mustang, DeLorean turned to the 14th floor for permission to offer a smaller version of the Pontiac Banshee show car for 1966. DeLorean's version was rejected because of GM's concern that his design would take away sales from the Corvette, their flagship performance vehicle, so instead they forced him to work with the existing Camaro design. He could only make changes to the front and rear of the car and even had to use the same fenders. Suspension was a whole different story as the Firebird has front and rear suspension differences compared to Camaro. The vehicle, the Pontiac Firebird, introduced for the 1967 model year, became even more popular throughout the 70s. Shortly after the Firebird's introduction, DeLorean turned his attention to development of an all-new Grand Prix, the division's personal luxury car based on the full-sized Pontiac line since 1962. Sales were sagging by this time, however, but the new for 1969 model would have its own distinct body shell with drivetrain and chassis components from the intermediate-sized Pontiac A-body. DeLorean knew Pontiac division couldn't finance the new car alone, so DeLorean went to his former boss Pete Estes and asked to share the cost of development, with Pontiac having a one-year exclusivity before Chevrolet would release the 1970 Monte Carlo. The deal was done. The 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix looked a lot like a slightly scaled-down Cadillac Eldorado with its razor-sharp body lines and a 6-foot-long hood. Inside was a sporty and luxurious interior highlighted by a wraparound cockpit-style instrument panel, bucket seats and center console. The new model offered a sportier, high-performance, somewhat smaller and lower-priced alternative to the other personal luxury cars then on the market, such as the Ford Thunderbird, Buick Riviera, Lincoln Continental Mark III, and Oldsmobile Toronado. The 1969 Grand Prix production ended up at over 112,000 units, far higher than the 32,000 1968 Grand Prix built from the full-sized Pontiac body. During his time at Pontiac, DeLorean had begun to enjoy the freedom and celebrity that came with his position, and spent a good deal of his time traveling to locations around the world to support promotional events. His frequent public appearances helped to solidify his image as a rebel corporate businessman with his trendy dress style and casual banter. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, published in 1965, criticized a number of Detroit automobiles as poorly designed for safety concerns, including the Chevrolet Corvair model. Even as General Motors experienced revenue declines, Pontiac remained highly profitable under DeLorean, and despite his growing reputation as a corporate maverick, on February 15, 1969 he was again promoted. This time it was to head up the prestigious Chevrolet division, General Motors' flagship marque. Chevrolet. By this time, DeLorean commanded an annual salary of $200,000, with yearly bonuses of up to $400,000. He had made sizable investments in the San Diego Chargers and the New York Yankees sports teams, and was becoming ever more ubiquitous in popular culture. At a time when business executives were typically conservative, low-key individuals in three-piece suits, DeLorean wore long sideburns and unbuttoned shirts. He also horrified fellow GM executives by inviting Ford President Lee Iacocca to serve as best man at his second wedding. DeLorean continued his jet-setting lifestyle, and was often seen hanging out in business and entertainment celebrity circles. He became friends with James T. Aubrey, president of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios, and was introduced to celebrities such as financier Kirk Kerkorian, Chris Kraft, chairman Herb Siegel, entertainer Sammy Davis Jr., and The Tonight Show host Johnny Carson. The executive offices of General Motors headquarters continued to clash with DeLorean's nonconformity, and he was still not able to fit the traditional mold of conservatism that was usually expected of someone of his stature. When John was appointed, Chevrolet was having financial and organizational troubles, and GM President Ted Cole needed a first-class manager in that position to sort things out, a Euro company man or not. The new model Camaro was due out for the 1970 model year, and it was rapidly falling behind schedule. Redesigns for the Corvette Nova were also delayed, and unit sales had still not recovered from the past 4 years of turmoil, much of that because of the bad publicity surrounding the Corvette and well-publicized quality control issues affecting other Chevy models, including defective motor mounts that led to an unprecedented recall of 6.7 million Chevrolets built between 1965 and 1969. DeLorean responded to the production problems by delaying the release of the Camaro, and simplifying the modifications to the Corvette Nova. He used the extra time to streamline Chevrolet's production overhead and reduce assembly costs. By 1971, Chevrolet was experiencing record sales in excess of 3 million vehicles, and his division alone was nearly matching that of the entire Ford Motor Company. Another promotion was imminent for DeLorean. The Vega was assigned to Chevrolet by corporate management, specifically by GM President Ted Cole, just weeks before DeLorean's 1969 arrival as Chevrolet Division's general manager. In a Motor Trend interview August 1970, DeLorean said, "Vega will be the highest quality product ever built by Chevrolet." By DeLorean's orders, tens of extra inspectors were assigned on the Vega assembly line and the first 2,000 cars were road tested. He stated, "The first cars, from a manufacturing standpoint, were well built." But in 1972, General Motors Assembly Division took over the Chevrolet Lordstown assembly plant and adjoining Fisher Body plant. Their main goal was to cut costs, and more than 800 workers were laid off, many of which were additional inspectors. This led to assembly line vandalism, with workers intentionally slowing the line, leaving off parts and installing others improperly. Incomplete and often non-functioning cars soon filled the factory lot, which then had to be reprocessed and repaired by a team assigned to this task by DeLorean. A one-month strike followed and dealers didn't receive enough cars for the demand in 1972. DeLorean regrouped for the 1973 model year with Vega sales of 395,792. The 1 millionth Vega was built in May 1973, a month after DeLorean's GM resignation. In 1972, DeLorean was appointed to the position of Vice President of Car and Truck Production for the entire General Motors line, and his eventual rise to president seemed inevitable. However, the idea of him assuming that position was almost intolerable to GM executives, and on April 2, 1973, he announced that he was leaving the company, telling the press, "I want to do things in the social area. I have to do them, and unfortunately the nature of our business just didn't permit me to do as much as I wanted." Although it was rumored that he had been fired, GM gave him a Florida Cadillac franchise as a retirement gift, and DeLorean did in fact take over the presidency of the National Alliance of Businessmen, a charitable organization with the mission of employing Americans in need, founded by Lyndon Johnson and Henry Ford. GM was a major contributor to the group, and agreed to continue his salary while he remained president of NAB. DeLorean was sharply critical of the direction GM had taken by the start of the 1970s, saying that there's no forward response at General Motors to what the public wants today. He also objected to the idea of using rebates to sell cars on the grounds that a car should make people's eyes light up when they step into the showroom. Rebates are merely a way of convincing customers to buy bland cars they're not interested in. Patrick Wright, author and former Businessweek reporter, approached DeLorean with the idea of writing a book based on his experiences at General Motors. DeLorean agreed to dictate his recollections for Wright, who wrote the book. The final product, published in 1979, On a Clear Day You Can See General Motors, sold approximately 1.6 million copies, but disagreements over the content led to a conflict between the collaborators and a libel suit against DeLorean. DeLorean claimed to have never received his share of the revenues. DeLorean Motor Company. DeLorean left General Motors in 1973 to form his own company, the DeLorean Motor Company. A two-seater sports car prototype was shown in the mid-1970s called the DeLorean Safety Vehicle, with its body shell designed by Atoll Design's Giorgetto Giugiaro. The car entered into production as the DMC-12, but known simply as the DeLorean. The car's body distinctively used stainless steel and featured gull-wing doors and was powered by the Dovran V6 engine developed by Peugeot, Renault and Volvo. The manufacturing plant to build the new car was built in Doonmurray, Northern Ireland, with substantial financial incentives from the Northern Ireland Development Agency of around £100 million. Renault was contracted to build the factory, which employed over 2,000 workers at its peak production. The engine was made by Renault, while Lotus designed the chassis and bodywork details. The Doonmurray factory would eventually turn out around 9,000 cars over 21 months of operation. Production delays meant the DMC-12 did not reach the consumer market until January 1981, and in the interim the new car market had slumped considerably due to the 1980 U.S. economic recession. This was compounded by unexpectedly lukewarm reviews from critics and the public, who generally felt the uniqueness of the DMC-12 styling did not compensate for the higher price and lower horsepower relative to other sport coupes on the market. While interest in the DMC-12 quickly dwindled, competing models with lower price tags and more powerful engines sold in record numbers during 1980-1 in spite of the ongoing recession. By February 1982, more than half of the roughly 7,000 DMC-12s produced remained unsold. DMC was $175 million in debt, and the Doonmurray factory was placed in receivership. After going into receivership in February 1982, DMC produced another 2,000 cars until John DeLorean's arrest in late October, at which point liquidation proceedings were undertaken and the factory was seized by the British government for good. Arrest and trial. On October 19, 1982, DeLorean was charged with trafficking in cocaine by the U.S. government, following a videotaped sting operation in which he was recorded by undercover federal agents agreeing to bankroll a $1.8 million, 100 kg cocaine smuggling operation in exchange for a $24 million cut of the eventual profits. The government was tipped off to DeLorean by confidential informant James Timothy Hoffman, a former neighbor, who reported to his FBI superiors that DeLorean had approached him to ask about setting up a cocaine deal. In reality, Hoffman had called DeLorean and suggested the deal as part of his efforts to receive a reduced sentence on a 1981 federal cocaine trafficking charge that he was awaiting trial on. Hoffman also stated that he was aware of DeLorean's financial troubles before he contacted him, and had heard him admit that he needed $17 million in a hurry to prevent DMC's imminent insolvency. Taken together, these two elements allowed DeLorean to successfully defend himself at trial with the procedural defense of police entrapment. Despite video and audio evidence clearly showing him negotiating over the particulars of the deal and referring to a suitcase full of cocaine as good as gold, His lawyers successfully argued that the FBI and DEA had unfairly targeted and illegally entrapped John DeLorean when they allowed Hoffman to randomly elicit DeLorean into a criminal conspiracy simply because he was known to be financially vulnerable. Another factor was DeLorean's lack of criminal history, whereas Hoffman was a career criminal who stood to directly benefit if he was able to convince DeLorean to incriminate himself on tape. The DeLorean defense team did not call any witnesses. DeLorean was found not guilty on August 16, 1984, but by then DMC had already collapsed into bankruptcy and DeLorean's reputation as a businessman was irrevocably tarnished. When asked after his acquittal if he planned to resume his career in the auto industry, DeLorean bitterly quipped, "Would you buy a used car from me?" Later enterprises. On November 1, 1994, DeLorean filed patent 5,359,941 with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for a raised monorail transport. The transport was never built. In the years before his death, DeLorean planned to resurrect his car company, and gave interviews describing a new vehicle called the DMC-12. According to his family, he spent much of his last several years working on this new venture. In an effort to gather funds, he designed and sold high-end watches via the Internet under the name DeLorean Time. Made of what appeared in promotions to be injection-molded stainless steel, the watches sold for $3,495. Purchasers were placed on a waiting list for the chance to buy one of the first DMC-2s when they became available. None of the watches seem to have ever been built or delivered to customers before DeLorean's death. The DeLorean Motor Company name was subsequently owned by a Texas-based firm that provided parts and professional restoration to DeLorean DMC-12 owners. Although John DeLorean was not involved in the business, its vice president James Epstein spoke with him on the phone once a month, the last time being 2 days before his death in March 2005. According to Epstein, in their final conversation, DeLorean expressed his dismay at the then-current direction of General Motors, saying they have too many bin counters and not enough engineers. Personal life. According to his autobiography, both DeLorean and ex-wife Christina Ferrer became born-again Christians following the entrapment controversy. DeLorean was married 4 times. His first marriage was to Elizabeth Higgins on September 3, 1954 and divorced in 1969. DeLorean then married Kelly Harmon, the sister of actor Mark Harmon and daughter of Heisman Trophy winner Tom Harmon and actress Elise Knox on May 31, 1969. They divorced in 1972. His third marriage was to model Christina Ferrer, ending in divorce in 1985. He was married to Sally Baldwin until his death in 2005. DeLorean also adopted a son, Zachary, as a single father. DeLorean's name is correctly spelled without the space, as DeLorean. The same goes for the company. Only if the use of lowercase letters was not possible, for instance on typewritten documents of the DeLorean Motor Company, the use of a space is correct. This appears to have been the company's chosen form. In typeset documents, a half space, not a full space, appears between the two portions, and the same is visible in more stylistic representations, as on the automobiles themselves. DeLorean appeared in a widely published magazine advertisement for Cutty Sark whiskey in the year prior to his arrest and the collapse of his company. It was captioned, "1 out of every 100 new businesses succeeds. Here's to those who take the odds." When the Back to the Future film came out in 1985, featuring DeLorean's namesake car, DeLorean wrote a letter to Bob Gale, one of the movie's producers and writers, thanking him for immortalizing the car in the film. The letter can be seen in the special features of the Back to the Future DVD release. In 1999, DeLorean declared personal bankruptcy after fighting over 40 legal cases since the collapse of DeLorean Motor Company. He was forced to sell his 434-acre estate in Bedminster, New Jersey in 2000. It was purchased by real estate tycoon Donald Trump and converted to a golf course. Death. DeLorean died at Overlook Hospital in Summit, New Jersey from a stroke, on March 19, 2005 at age 80. He was a resident of Bedminster, New Jersey. His ashes are buried at the Whitechapel Cemetery, in Troy, Michigan. His tombstone shows a depiction of his DMC-12 with the gull-wing doors open. At the request of his family, and in keeping with military tradition, he was interred with military honors for his service in World War II. Portrayals and coverage in books, film and music. Books. On a clear day you can see General Motors, John Z. DeLorean's Look Inside the Automotive Giant by J. Patrick White with John Z. DeLorean, Dream Maker, The Rise and Fall of John Z. DeLorean by Ivan Fallon and James Rhodes. Published in Great Britain under the title, DeLorean, The Rise and Fall of a Dream Maker. Grand Illusions, The Cosmic Career of John DeLorean by Hillel Levin. Published in Great Britain under the title, John DeLorean, The Maverick Mogul. DeLorean, Stainless Steel Illusion by John Lamb. Second edition published in 2003 by Red Lion Press. The DeLorean Tapes, DeLorean by John Z. DeLorean with Ted Schwartz. John DeLorean's personal autobiography. Hard Driving, My Years with John DeLorean by William Haddad, The DeLorean Story, The Car, The People, The Scandal by Nick Sutton. One Hear the Sirens in the Street by Adrian McKinty. Fictional novel revolving around the DeLorean plant and has John DeLorean as a character. DeLorean, Celebrating the Impossible by Chris Parnham, and Withers and Barry Wills. Documentary films. DeLorean, a documentary directed by Academy Award-winning filmmakers D.A. Pennebaker and Chris Heekdoos. The film chronicles John DeLorean throughout the launch of his DeLorean DMC-12 sports car in 1981. DeLorean, Living the Dream chronicles the history of the iconic DeLorean automobile from the rise and fall of legendary automaker John Z. DeLorean, to the international phenomenon of loyal owners and devoted fans who've kept the dream alive for over 3 decades. Television, Monkeys, a BBC TV movie based on the book The DeLorean Tapes, which transcribes the original FBI entrapment tapes of John DeLorean. DeLorean was portrayed by Manning Redwood. The film was directed by Academy Award-winning director, Danny Boyle. Car Crash, The DeLorean Story, a BBC television documentary about the rise and fall of the DeLorean Motor Company. Anything to Win, The Crash of John DeLorean, a TV series produced by the Game Show Network. Movies and miniseries. Since DeLorean's arrest in 1982, there have been several Hollywood production companies vying to tell the story of his life. After his acquittal in 1984, DeLorean himself pursued getting a movie made, which was to be based on his 1985 autobiography. James Coburn was attached to play DeLorean in another competing unofficial biopic. DeLorean threatened to sue anyone who made a movie about him without his permission, and the Coburn project was never made. DeLorean himself continued to try and get a movie made up until his death in 2005. As of August 2014, there are currently several different competing movies and television miniseries in development. In the 1996 film The People vs. Larry Flynt, one of the storylines it includes is Larry Flynt being summoned to court for publicly leaking the FBI entrapment tapes. John DeLorean's name is referenced throughout, and original FBI surveillance footage is used in the film. Music. The band Neon Neon recorded a concept album Stainless Style in 2008 based on John DeLorean's life story. The rapper Damian Gray wrote a song about DeLorean called DeLorean Gray on his album One King Down. The DeLorean Museum. In 2006, several DeLorean DMC-12 owners, enthusiasts and DeLorean historians formed the DeLorean Museum. The mission of the museum is to honor and perpetuate the accomplishments of John Z. DeLorean through the display, interpretation, conservation and preservation of DeLorean vehicles, archives and other objects to enrich present and future generations. See also, DeLorean Motor Company, DeLorean DMC-12, Chevrolet Vega, DeLorean Influence, Pontiac GTO, DeLorean Story and Notes. External links. DeLorean Motor Company, The DeLorean Museum, DeLorean Owners Association, John DeLorean. The Times Obituary, John DeLorean at Find a Grave, John DeLorean at the Internet Movie Database, Stainless Steel Productions, NNDB John DeLorean, The Rise and Fall of John DeLorean, 1980s car maker DeLorean dies at 80.